Hey everyone, and welcome to my first cryptid deep dive. Today we're heading to the Buckeye State, and I've got to tell you, Ohio might just be the most overlooked cryptid hotspot in America. We're not talking about your usual Bigfoot stuff here. No, Ohio brings something unique to the table. We've got frog people, lake monsters, creatures with 2x4s, and things that are so strange they sound like they came from a fever dream. Before we start, I'd love to know something. If you actually live in the USA, which state are you listening from, and what time is it right now? Maybe you actually live in Ohio and get to see these cryptids firsthand. I'd really want to hear your stories in the comments below. This video is meant to be your companion for the next 2 hours. Something you can unwind to, work alongside, or even fall asleep to, as we check out Ohio's weirdest tales. So, get comfortable, settle in, and let's jump into some truly bizarre folklore together. Chapter 1. The Loveland Frogman. We're starting strong with what might be Ohio's most well-known cryptid, and honestly, one of the strangest creatures in American folklore, the Loveland Frogman. Now, when I first heard about this, I thought someone was messing with me. A 4-foot-tall frog that walks on 2 legs. Come on. But here's the thing. This creature was reportedly seen by police officers multiple times. And these weren't just random sightings late at night, by people who maybe had a few too many at the local bar. These were believable witnesses doing their jobs. Let's set the scene. It's March 3, 1972, around 1 in the morning. Officer Ray Shockey, of the Loveland Police Department, is driving along Riverside Drive near the Little Miami River. It's a quiet night. The kind where you're mostly just making sure everything's calm, and maybe thinking about what you're going to have for breakfast in a few hours. Then suddenly, in his headlights, he sees something on the side of the road. Now, Officer Shockey at first thinks it's a dog. Makes sense, right? But as he gets closer, this thing stands up on 2 legs, and it's not a dog. Not even close. What Shockey describes is something that sounds like it walked straight out of a science fiction book. 4 feet tall, leathery skin, a face that's clearly frog-like, and the kicker, webbed hands. This thing looks at the patrol car for a moment, and then it does what any sensible frog monster would do. It jumps over the guardrail and heads down toward the river. Shockey, to his credit, doesn't just brush this off as his imagination or tiredness. He reports it. He files an official report describing exactly what he saw. And here's where it gets even more interesting. 2 weeks later, on March 17th, another Loveland officer named Mark Matthews has his own encounter. Matthews is also driving along Riverside Drive when he spots what he thinks is an animal lying in the road, maybe hurt or dead. Matthews gets out of his car to check on it, and the animal sits up. It's the same creature Shockey described. 4 feet tall, leathery skin, frog-like face. Matthews, being a police officer, pulls out his gun. The creature starts to move toward the guardrail, and Matthews, in what I can only imagine was a moment of total panic, mixed with duty, shoots at it. He says he hit it, but the creature still managed to climb over the guardrail and vanish. Now, here's where the story gets a bit unclear. No pun intended. Years later, in 2016, Officer Matthews gave an interview where he took back some of his story. He claimed it was just a large iguana, probably someone's pet that got loose, and that the whole frogman thing had been blown out of proportion. But here's my question. If you're a trained police officer and you see an iguana, even a big one, are you really going to describe it as having leathery frog-like skin and standing 4 feet tall on 2 legs? Iguanas can get big, sure, but they don't usually stand upright and stare at you like they're figuring out whether you're friend or enemy. Plus, and this is important, there were earlier sightings. Back in 1955, a businessman claimed he saw 3 of these creatures under a bridge near Loveland. He described them as having wrinkled skin, wide lipless mouths, and he even claimed one of them was holding some kind of stick or rod that gave off sparks. Now, that detail is where things get a bit too sci-fi for me, but the basic description matches what the officers would report 17 years later. The Little Miami River area has been a hotspot for these sightings, and locals still talk about the frogmen today. Some people think it could be a wrongly identified animal, maybe a large salamander or a deformed creature of some kind. Others think it's something truly unknown, possibly some kind of amphibian that evolved in isolation, or a creature that's managed to stay hidden from science. And then there are those who think the whole thing is a hoax or group hysteria. But here's what I find convincing. These weren't random people looking for attention. These were police officers, people trained to watch and report accurately, who saw something strange enough that they were willing to file official reports and stand by those reports. At least at first. Whatever was in Loveland in 1972 It scared experienced officers enough that one of them pulled his weapon and fired. The Loveland Frogman remains one of Ohio's most lasting cryptid legends. And whether it's a real creature, a case of mistaken identity, or something else entirely, it's captured people's imagination for over 50 years now. Chapter 2: The Ohio Grassman. Alright, let's talk about Ohio's version of Bigfoot. But here's the thing. The Ohio Grassman isn't just a Midwest copy of the Pacific Northwest's most famous cryptid. According to witnesses and researchers, the Grassman is meaner, more aggressive, and has some unique behaviors that make it different from its western relatives. The Grassman, sometimes called the Kenmore Grassman or the Orange Eyes, is described as a 7 to 10 foot tall, two-legged ape-like creature covered in tangled dark hair. Witnesses report a strong, muscular build, long arms, and a face that's more ape than human. But what really makes the Grassman stand out are those eyes. Multiple witnesses describe glowing orange or yellow eyes that seem to stare right through you, especially at night. The name Grassman comes from one of this creature's most unique behaviors. Unlike other Bigfoot-type creatures that might build simple shelters or lean-tos, the Grassman is known for making elaborate nests out of grass, branches, and other plants. These aren't just random piles of vegetation either. Witnesses describe carefully woven structures, sometimes reaching 6 or 7 feet across, found deep in Ohio's forests. Salt Fork State Park, located in Guernsey County, has become the main spot for Grassman activity. This park covers over 20,000 acres of thick forest, rolling hills, and remote wilderness. Perfect hiding place for a creature that wants to avoid people. Starting in the 1960s and continuing through today, hikers, campers, and park rangers have reported strange encounters in these woods. One of the most detailed sightings happened in 1978, when two separate groups of campers reported seeing a large hairy creature moving through the trees near their campsites. The creature was estimated to be around 8 feet tall and moved with a purposeful, almost human way of walking. What made this sighting especially believable was that the two groups were camping in different areas of the park and reported their sightings on their own. Yet, their descriptions matched almost perfectly. But the Grassman isn't just happy to be seen from far away. Multiple reports describe aggressive behavior, marking territory, and intimidation tactics. Campers have reported being hit with rocks and sticks thrown from the tree. Others describe terrifying sounds, deep whooping calls, and screams that echo through the forest at night. Some witnesses report finding their campsites destroyed after leaving for a hike, with coolers ripped open, tents torn, and supplies scattered. In 1981, a group of hunters in Salt Fork State Park had an encounter that they still talk about today. They were tracking a deer when they heard something huge moving through the bushes. Thinking it might be a bear, which are rare but do exist in Ohio, they moved to get a better look. What they saw was no bear. A creature standing upright, easily 8 feet tall, covered in dark brown hair, was watching them from behind a tree. The hunters, experienced outdoorsmen who'd spent their whole lives in these woods, were so shaken that they gave up their hunt and left the area right away. The Grassman has also been blamed for livestock deaths and disappearances. In the counties around Salt Fork, farmers have reported chickens, goats, and even calves going missing with large human-like footprints found near the scene. These prints, typically measuring 15 to 18 inches long and showing clear toe marks, don't match any known animal in Ohio. What makes the Grassman particularly interesting from a cryptozoology standpoint is how consistent the reports are. Unlike some cryptids, where descriptions vary wildly, Grassman witnesses describe very similar features: the huge size, the dark tangled hair, those distinctive glowing eyes, the aggressive territorial behavior, and of course, those elaborate grass nests. Researchers have found dozens of these nests throughout Ohio's forests, especially in the Salt Fork area. Some look fresh, while others seem like they've been there for years. Skeptics argue these could be natural formations or even beds made by deer. But the detailed weaving and the sheer size of some of these structures suggest something with opposable thumbs and decent intelligence built them. Is the Grassman real? That's the million-dollar question. Ohio has plenty of remote wilderness where a large primate could possibly exist without being found. The state's forests have grown back significantly since the early 1900s, providing large areas of habitat. But a breeding group of 10-foot-tall apes living in Ohio, that's a tough sell for most scientists. What we do know is that people keep reporting encounters with something in Ohio's forests. Whether it's an undiscovered primate, a case of mistaken identity, or something else entirely. The legend of the Grassman remains one of Ohio's most interesting cryptid mysteries. Chapter 3: Mothman Ohio Sightings. Now, I know what you're thinking. Mothman isn't that West Virginia's thing. And you'd be right. Mothman is most famously linked with Point Pleasant, West Virginia, and the tragic Silver Bridge collapse of 1967. But here's what a lot of people don't know. The Ohio side of the river had its own wave of Mothman sightings. And some researchers argue that Ohio might have actually had encounters before West Virginia made the creature famous. For those not familiar with the Mothman legend, we're talking about a creature described as a large winged human-like being, standing somewhere between 6 and 7 feet tall, with a wingspan that witnesses estimate at 10 feet or more. But the most distinct and terrifying feature are the eyes. Glowing red eyes set wide apart where the creature's shoulders would be, that seem to hypnotize witnesses and leave them with a feeling of dread that lasts long after the encounter. The Silver Bridge connected Point Pleasant, West Virginia, with Gallipolis, Ohio, crossing the Ohio River. In the 13 months leading up to the bridge's collapse, on December 15, 1967, which killed 46 people, residents on both sides of the river reported seeing this strange creature. But while Point Pleasant got most of the attention, Gallipolis and the surrounding Ohio communities had their own encounters. One of the earliest Ohio sightings actually comes before the famous Point Pleasant encounters. In November 1966, just days before the McClintock Wildlife Station sightings that would make Mothman famous, residents near Gallipolis reported seeing a large gray creature with wings sitting on a barn roof. The witnesses, a local farming family, described feeling an overwhelming sense of fear and dread. Even though the creature didn't make any aggressive moves, it simply sat there, those red eyes glowing in the darkness, watching them. Throughout late 1966 and all of 1967, residents of Gallipolis, Cheshire, and other Ohio River communities reported dozens of sightings. People saw the creature flying over the river, sitting on trees near the bridge, and in some cases following their cars along Route 7. Multiple witnesses reported the same experience, driving at night, when suddenly those red eyes would appear in their rearview mirror. And no matter how fast they drove, the creature kept up, sometimes for miles. What made the Ohio sightings particularly interesting was the timing. Many happened in clusters, multiple witnesses in the same area reporting encounters within days or even hours of each other. And unlike some cryptid sightings, where you might question the believability of the witnesses, these reports came from teachers, police officers, business owners, ordinary people going about their daily lives, who suddenly found themselves face to face with something they couldn't explain. One especially chilling account comes from a young couple who were parked near the Ohio riverbank in December 1967, just weeks before the bridge collapse. They were talking when they heard a sound they described as something between a woman's scream and a high-pitched squeal. Looking up, they saw a massive creature with wings spread wide, gliding silently toward their car. The creature passed directly overhead, so close they could see the texture of its wings and those unmistakable red eyes. They started their car and fled, but both reported feeling physically sick for days afterward, bothered by nightmares and a feeling that something bad was coming. After the Silver Bridge collapsed, killing 46 people during rush hour traffic, on December 15, 1967, Mothman sightings dropped off sharply on both sides of the river. This led to one of the most lasting theories about the creature: that Mothman appears as a sign of disaster, a warning of terrible events to come. Skeptics argue this is just people seeing patterns after the fact, giving their sightings meaning after a tragedy. But witnesses who saw the creature in those months leading up to the collapse will tell you there was something otherworldly about their encounters, a sense that this wasn't just an unknown animal, but something completely different. Ohio continued to have occasional Mothman sightings over the years, though nothing like the cluster of encounters in 1966 and 1967. In 2007, right before the I-35W bridge collapse in Minnesota, there were reports of Mothman-like creatures in the area. Some Ohio residents claim to have seen similar creatures near bridges in Cincinnati and Cleveland around the same time. Though these reports never got the same attention, the question of what Mothman actually is remains hotly debated. Skeptics point to large birds like sandhill cranes or owls, which can have impressive wingspans and reflective eyes. But witnesses who've seen both large birds and Mothman will tell you there's no comparison. This creature moves wrong, has a presence that birds simply don't have. And those eyes don't reflect light like an animal's eyes. They glow with their own inner light. Whether Mothman is a real creature, a mass hallucination, or something that doesn't fit normal explanation, its connection to Ohio is undeniable. The Ohio River communities lived through the same fear and wonder as their West Virginia neighbors, and their stories deserve to be part of the Mothman legend. Chapter 4. South Bay Bessie. Let's head to the shores of Lake Erie, because Ohio's cryptid scene isn't just limited to land. Meet South Bay Bessie, Lake Erie's very own lake monster, and one of the most often reported water cryptids in North America. We're talking about hundreds of sightings spanning over 2 centuries, from Native American accounts through modern-day encounters with commercial fishermen and people out boating for fun. Bessie, as she's affectionately known, is typically described as a snake-like creature, measuring anywhere from 30 to 40 feet long, though some witnesses claim even larger sizes. Unlike lake monsters from other regions that might be described as dinosaur-like, or with multiple humps, Bessie is consistently described as snake-like, with a body thickness of about 12 to 18 inches, dark gray or greenish-brown coloring, and a head that some witnesses say looks like a dog or a horse. The earliest recorded sightings of Bessie go back to the late 1700s and early 1800s. Native American tribes in the region, including the Erie people for whom the lake is named, had stories of a huge snake that lived in the waters. Early European settlers brushed these off as mythology until they started having their own encounters. In 1817, a group of men near Sandusky Bay reported seeing a massive snake-like creature moving through the water with its head raised several feet above the surface. But Bessie really became well known in 1931, when several people at Cedar Point Amusement Park, including the park's accountant and his wife, spotted a large snake-like creature in the water. This wasn't a quick glimpse either. The creature was visible for several minutes, moving through the water parallel to the shore, allowing dozens of witnesses to watch it. The local newspaper ran the story, and suddenly everyone was talking about the Lake Erie monster. Throughout the 1960s and 1970s, sightings increased dramatically. Commercial fishermen working the lake reported encounters with something huge moving beneath their boats, sometimes coming up close enough that they could see the creature's body through the clear water. In 1969, a fishing boat captain named John Shaner had an encounter that he swore was no fish. He described a creature at least 35 feet long, with a flat snake-like head, moving through the water near his boat. What spooked him wasn't just the size, but the way it moved more deliberately than any known fish, almost as if it were curious about the boat. One of the most believable sightings happened in 1983, when several members of a Port Clinton charter fishing boat spotted Bessie near the Ohio shore. These weren't amateur fishermen or tourists looking for attention. These were people who'd spent their whole lives on Lake Erie, who knew every fish species in the lake, and they all agreed that what they saw was nothing they'd ever encountered before. The creature came up about 1,000 feet from their boat, showing about 30 feet of its length, moving in a smooth, wave-like motion, before going back down into the depths. What makes Bessie particularly interesting is that sightings aren't limited to one area of the lake. Reports come from the entire southern shore, from Toledo to Cleveland to Erie, Pennsylvania. The creature, or maybe multiple creatures, seems to move throughout the lake with sightings, sometimes happening in the open water, and other times near shore or in bays. So what could Bessie actually be? Skeptics offer several explanations. Sturgeon, which can grow to impressive sizes, and have been known to reach lengths of 10 to 12 feet in the Great Lakes region. Floating logs or debris that people mistake for a living creature. Waves and water patterns that create the illusion of something moving through the water. Schools of fish moving together that from a distance could look like one large creature. But here's the problem with all those explanations. Lake Erie isn't that deep, with an average depth of only 62 feet, and it's heavily used and well studied. If sturgeon or some other known fish were regularly growing to 30 or 40 feet, we'd have physical proof by now. Professional fishermen, people who understand water patterns and wave action, are among the most frequent witnesses. These aren't people who are easily fooled by floating logs. Could Bessie be a leftover population of some prehistoric creature? It's tempting to think so, but Lake Erie is only about 10,000 to 12,000 years old, formed at the end of the last ice age. Any creature living there would have had to either evolve quickly or move in from somewhere else, and keeping a breeding population of 30-foot water creatures in a relatively shallow lake without solid physical evidence is, well, hard to explain. Yet the sightings continue. In 2001, a video came out showing something large moving through the water near Sandusky. Analysis wasn't clear. Skeptics said it was debris or fish. Believers said it showed a creature. In 2011, charter boat captains reported multiple sightings over a 2-week period, all describing the same thing: a large, dark, snake-like creature moving through the water. The town of Huron, Ohio, has embraced Bessie as a local legend, even offering a $100,000 reward for anyone who can capture live physical proof of the creature's existence. So far, nobody's claimed that reward. Bessie, if she exists, remains as hard to find as ever, a mystery hiding in the depths of Lake Erie. Chapter 5. The Melon Heads. Alright, we need to talk about the Melon Heads. And I'm warning you right now, this one gets dark. We're moving from creatures that are strange or frightening to something that touches on genuinely disturbing territory. The Melon Heads are one of Ohio's most unsettling legends, mixing elements of cryptozoology with urban legend and very real fears about government experiments and mistreatment. The Melon Heads are described as small human-like beings, typically said to be between 4 and 5 feet tall, with unusually large round heads. Their skin is described as pale, almost see-through, and their eyes are said to be bigger than normal human eyes. Witnesses report that they move in groups, rarely alone, and are extremely aggressive toward anyone who goes into their territory. That territory, according to legend, is the woods around Kirtland, particularly Wisner Road and Chardon, which locals have dubbed Melonhead Road. The origin story of the Melonheads varies depending on who you ask, but the most common version involves a mysterious figure known as Dr. Crow. According to the legend, in the early 1900s, Dr. Crow ran an asylum or orphanage in the Kirtland area. The details get fuzzy here. Some versions say he was doing experiments on the children in his care, maybe involving hydrocephalus or other conditions that cause abnormal head growth. Other versions claim he was deliberately creating these creatures through genetic experiments or exposure to chemicals. The story goes that Dr. Crow's experiments went horribly wrong, or maybe they went exactly as he planned, depending on the version. The children developed these enlarged heads, became violent and unpredictable, and eventually turned on Dr. Crow himself, killing him and burning down the facility. The surviving Melonheads escaped into the surrounding woods, where they've supposedly lived ever since, coming out at night to scare, attack, or even kill anyone who goes into their territory. Now, let's separate fact from fiction here, because this is where things get murky. There's no historical record of a Dr. Crow running an asylum or orphanage in Kirtland. No records of experiments, no documented facility that matches the legend. However, there are pieces of truth woven into this story that might explain why it continues. Ohio did have several institutions in the early to mid-1900s that housed people with various conditions, including developmental disabilities. The care at some of these places was, to put it mildly, terrible. Patients were often neglected, abused, and yes, in some cases, subjected to medical experiments that would be considered unthinkable today. While there's no evidence of anyone creating Melonheads, the real history of mistreatment in institutions could easily fuel legends like this. The other thing that adds fuel to this fire is that people genuinely report seeing something in the Kirtland woods. Throughout the 1970s, 1980s, and continuing to today, people driving down Wisner Road late at night report encounters with strange figures. These figures are described as moving quickly through the trees, sometimes running alongside cars, peeking out from the tree line with unusually large heads outlined against the moonlight. In 1983, a group of teenagers decided to drive down Melonhead Road as a dare, because teenagers have been making questionable decisions since the beginning of time. According to their account, they were driving slowly, joking and laughing about the legend when something hit their car. Not a rock thrown by a person, but something that struck with enough force to dent the roof. They sped up, and through the rearview mirror, they claimed to see several small figures standing in the road behind them, watching them leave. Local police have been called to the area numerous times over the years, responding to reports of prowlers, strange figures, and teenagers who got more than they expected while looking for the Melonheads. Officers who've patrolled the area will tell you that something about those woods feels off, though most are quick to add that they've never personally seen anything that would confirm the legend. Skeptics, and I include myself in this camp to some degree, point out that the Melonhead legend shares a lot of similarities with other local legends across the country. There's a pattern in folklore studies where versions of the same story pop up in different regions, always with local details changed to make it feel authentic to that area. The basic outline of escaped patients or experimental subjects living in the woods shows up everywhere from Michigan to Connecticut. It's also worth noting that Wisner Road and the surrounding area are popular spots for teenagers looking for a scare, which means there's a built-in group of people ready to see something scary, often at night, often already expecting to see something frightening. The power of suggestion, combined with darkness, unfamiliar woods, and natural sounds, can create encounters that feel very real, even if nothing actually unusual happened. But then there are the witnesses who aren't teenagers on a thrill hunt. Adults, sometimes driving alone, who report seeing figures that don't fit any rational explanation. People who've lived in the area their whole lives and swear that something unusual lives in those woods. The Melon Heads remain one of Ohio's most debated cryptids, existing in this uncomfortable space between urban legend and something that might have some truth. Whether they're real creatures, mistaken people, or animals, or just the product of local folklore, they've earned their place in Ohio's cryptid collection, and they're not going away anytime soon. Chapter 6: The Minerva Monster. We're heading to Minerva, a small village in Stark County, and we're going to talk about one of the most thoroughly documented and frankly terrifying Bigfoot encounters in Ohio history. The Minerva Monster case is special because it wasn't just a quick glimpse in the woods. This was an ongoing encounter over several weeks with multiple witnesses, physical evidence, and even police involvement. This is the real deal, folks. Our story centers on the Keaton family, specifically Evelyn and Harold Keaton and their 2 teenage grandchildren who were staying with them in August 1978. The Keaton home was located on a rural property with fields and woods nearby. The kind of place where you'd expect to see deer, maybe a fox or a raccoon, but nothing that would make you question your sanity. On the evening of August 21, 1978, the Keaton family heard their horses making a commotion in the field behind their house. This wasn't unusual. Horses can be startled by all sorts of things, but the level of panic in the animals' behavior caught their attention. The family looked out their kitchen window, and what they saw changed their lives forever. Standing at the edge of their property just at the tree line was a massive hairy creature. The family estimated it stood 7 feet tall, maybe more, with broad shoulders and arms that seemed too long for its body. The creature was covered in dark, shaggy hair, matted and dirty looking. But what really stuck with them, and what they described in detail to investigators later, was the creature's face. It was more ape-like than human, with a flat nose, a heavy brow, and eyes that reflected the porch light back at them. The creature didn't immediately run away. Instead, it stood there, swaying slightly, watching the house. The family watched it back, nobody quite believing what they were seeing. After what felt like forever, but was probably only a few minutes, the creature turned and walked back into the woods, moving with a smooth 2-legged walk that was definitely not human and certainly not bear. The Keatons called the police. Now, you might think that'd be the end of it. Police would show up, find nothing, file a report about worried citizens seeing a bear, and everyone would move on with their lives. But that's not what happened. The Minerva police took the report seriously, and more importantly, they found evidence. Officers checking the property found tracks. Large human-like footprints measuring about 16 inches long and 7 inches wide, pressed deep into the soft soil at the edge of the woods. These weren't bear tracks. Anyone familiar with wildlife could see that. They showed clear marks of toes, a heel, and an arch arranged in a stride pattern consistent with a 2-legged creature. The police photographed these tracks and made plaster casts, which still exist today. But here's where the story goes from interesting to genuinely frightening. The creature came back multiple times over the next several weeks. This thing kept returning to the Keaton property. On one occasion, the creature actually approached the house, looking through the kitchen window while the family was inside. Imagine sitting in your own kitchen and seeing a 7-foot-tall hairy creature with glowing eyes staring at you through the glass. The family was understandably terrified. During one of these return visits, Harold Keaton grabbed his rifle and went outside, not to shoot the creature necessarily, but to protect his family and property. He came face to face with the creature at a distance of maybe 50 feet. Harold, a lifelong outdoorsman who'd hunted and fished in Ohio his entire life, said it was unlike anything he'd ever seen. The creature seemed just as surprised to see him as he was to see it. And after a tense standoff, it retreated into the woods. Word spread through Minerva quickly, small towns being what they are. And soon other residents started reporting their own sightings and experiences. A local gas station owner reported seeing a similar creature cross the road near his business. A farmer found strange tracks in his field that matched the description of what police found on the Keaton property. Hunters reported finding areas in the nearby woods where trees had been broken and twisted in ways that would require enormous strength. Local media picked up the story, and Minerva became the center of attention for Bigfoot enthusiasts from across the country. Researchers came to the area with recording equipment, cameras, and plaster casting materials. Some of these investigators interviewed dozens of locals and put together a surprisingly strong set of data, suggesting that something unusual was indeed happening in Stark County. One particular piece of evidence that researchers found convincing was how consistent the reports were. When investigators interviewed witnesses separately, their descriptions matched remarkably well. 7 feet tall or more, dark matted hair, A strong musky smell, those glowing eyes, and that distinctive two-legged walk. These weren't people comparing notes and matching their stories. These were independent witnesses describing the same thing. The activity around Minerva decreased significantly by late September 1978, though occasional sightings continued for years afterward. The Keaton family moved away from the property. And who could blame them? The emotional toll of having a creature repeatedly visit your home, of not feeling safe in the place you're supposed to feel most secure. That's not something most people can just shrug off. The Minerva Monster case remains one of the most believable Bigfoot encounters in Ohio history. You've got multiple witnesses, physical evidence in the form of tracks and casts, police documentation, and a timeline of events that's remarkably consistent. Skeptics argue it could have been a bear, despite the tracks clearly not being bear tracks. Others suggest a hoax, though the Keaton family never made money from their experience, and by all accounts were reluctant witnesses who just wanted to be left alone. Whatever stalked the Keaton property in 1978, it left a lasting mark on Minerva and on Ohio's cryptozoological history. Chapter 7: The Dogman of Defiance. Let's talk about one of Ohio's most terrifying cryptids, and I'm not using that word lightly. The Dogman of Defiance is something that, even among cryptid researchers who've heard it all, inspires a special kind of fear. We're talking about a creature that combines the worst aspects of a wolf with human-like intelligence, and in at least one documented case, the apparent ability to use tools as weapons. Yeah, you heard that right. This thing picked up a 2x4. Defiance, located in northwestern Ohio near the Indiana border, had always been a quiet town. But in 1972, that changed when railway workers on the night shift started reporting encounters with something they couldn't explain. These weren't random people likely to exaggerate. These were working men, union railway workers, who'd seen their share of wildlife along the tracks and weren't easily scared. The creature they described was like something from a nightmare, standing between 6 and 7 feet tall when upright, but capable of dropping to all fours and moving with terrifying speed. The body was covered in dark, rough fur, with powerful muscles visible underneath. But it was the head that really stayed with witnesses. This wasn't a bear or a deformed dog. This was something with a clearly wolf-like face, a long snout filled with visible teeth, pointed ears, and eyes that glowed with an amber or yellowish color in the darkness. The first few sightings followed a pattern. Workers would see the creature watching them from a distance, just at the edge of their work lights. It moved with an intelligence that bothered them, seeming to study their activities rather than just wandering by like a curious animal might. Some workers reported hearing sounds, deep growls that they felt in their chest, and occasionally a howl that didn't sound quite like any wolf or coyote they'd heard before. Then things got worse. In late August 1972, 2 railway workers were doing maintenance on a section of track in a particularly isolated area, just outside Defiance. It was around 2 in the morning, that dead time of night when everything feels more threatening. They heard something moving in the trees beside the tracks. Heavy footsteps that were definitely too big to be a deer or a dog. One of the workers shined his flashlight toward the sound, and that's when they saw it. The dogman standing upright, about 30 feet away, just watching them. But this encounter was different from the previous ones. The creature didn't run. Instead, it moved closer, dropping to all fours and approaching in a way that both men later described as stalking behavior, like a predator sizing up prey. The workers, understandably terrified, grabbed the tools closest to them. One had a heavy wrench. The other had a railroad spike. They yelled at the creature, hoping to scare it off the way you might try to intimidate a wild animal. And here's where this story enters truly bizarre territory. The creature stopped, stood back up on 2 legs, and reached down to grab a piece of lumber that was lying near the tracks. A 2x4, about 4 feet long. It didn't just pick it up. It held it, handling it in a way that showed understanding of what a weapon was. The creature moved toward the workers, swinging the 2x4 in what both men described as a threatening manner. At this point, survival instinct took over. The workers ran. They dropped their tools and sprinted back toward their truck, not daring to look back until they were safely inside with the doors locked. Through the window, they could see the creature still holding the 2x4, standing in the middle of the tracks, watching them. They reported the incident to their supervisor, who at first thought they might have been drinking on the job. But these were longtime employees, with no history of problems, and their fear was genuine. The supervisor filed a report, and local police were notified. An investigation of the area the next day found that 2x4, now broken in half, lying in the dirt near the tracks. There were also prints in the soft earth. Dog-like, but much larger than any dog, with some appearing to show the creature switching between two-legged and four-legged movement. Word spread through the railway worker community, and soon other workers came forward with their own encounters. A conductor reported seeing the creature running alongside the train one night, keeping up at over 30 miles per hour before veering off into the woods. A maintenance crew found a deer carcass that had been torn apart with a violence that suggested something much more powerful than coyotes. The sightings around Defiance continued, occasionally throughout the 1970s and into the 1980s, though never with the same intensity as that summer of 1972. Hunters in the area reported encounters with a large wolf-like creature that would watch them from a distance, seeming unafraid. Farmers lost livestock under strange circumstances, finding their animals killed but not eaten, as if something had killed just for the sake of killing. The Dogman phenomenon isn't unique to Ohio. Similar creatures have been reported in Michigan, Wisconsin, and other Midwest states. Some researchers believe these might be related to werewolf legends brought over by European settlers, particularly from Germanic regions. Others think they could be a misidentified known animal, maybe wolves or coyotes with mange that makes them look more monstrous, or even large wild dogs. But the tool used, that's the detail that makes the Defiance encounters stand out. If these railway workers are telling the truth, and investigators who interviewed them believed they were, then we're talking about something with a level of intelligence that goes beyond what we'd expect from any known dog-like species. The ability to recognize a piece of lumber as a possible weapon and to swing it in a threatening way that suggests problem-solving ability and understanding of cause and effect. Could it have been a hoax? To workers making up a story for attention? Possible, but unlikely. They didn't gain anything from the story. They actually faced ridicule and doubt from some coworkers. And the genuine fear in their initial report doesn't fit with people playing a prank. The Dogman of Defiance remains one of Ohio's most puzzling cryptids. The combination of physical power, apparent intelligence, and aggressive behavior makes it one of the more frightening creatures in American cryptozoology. And somewhere in the woods around Defiance, railway workers still tell new hires about the summer of 1972 and the thing that picked up at Tuba. Chapter 8: The Charles Mill Lake Monster. Let's head to Ashland County and Charles Mill Lake because we need to talk about one of the strangest creatures in Ohio cryptozoology. The Charles Mill Lake Monster, also sometimes called the Orange Eyes for reasons that'll become clear, is bizarre even by cryptid standards. We're talking about an 11-foot tall, armless human-like being with webbed feet and glowing green eyes. Yeah, this one's weird even for me. Charles Mill Lake is a reservoir created in 1936 when the Army Corps of Engineers dammed the Black Fork of the Mohican River. It's a peaceful spot, popular with fishermen and boaters, surrounded by forests and rolling hills. But on the night of March 28, 1959, three friends would have an encounter at this lake that would haunt them for the rest of their lives. The three men, all in their early 20s, had driven out to Charles Mill Lake for some night fishing. They parked near the shore, set up their gear, and were enjoying a quiet evening when they heard something moving in the woods behind them. Now, this is Ohio. Woods make noise. Animals move around at night. This wasn't immediately alarming, but the sound kept getting closer, and it was heavy. Much heavier than a deer or even a bear would make. They turned their flashlights toward the tree line, and that's when they saw it. Coming out of the woods was a creature that looked like nothing they'd ever seen or could explain. The thing stood at least 11 feet tall, towering over them, even from a distance. Its body was human-like in shape, standing upright on two legs. But there was something fundamentally wrong about its proportions. The torso was thick and barrel-shaped. The legs were muscular but seemed too short for the body. And here's the really bizarre part. It had no visible arms. The creature's skin, or what they could see of it in their flashlight beams, appeared to be a grayish-green color, with a texture they described as smooth but somehow unnatural. Its head was roughly oval-shaped. And the eyes, those eyes were what really stayed with them. Glowing green, not reflecting the flashlight like an animal's eyes would, but giving off their own light, like something radioactive. But wait, it gets weirder. The creature had webbed feet. Large spread-out feet with visible webbing between the toes, clearly visible as it walked toward them across the muddy shore. The creature moved with a strange lurching walk. Each step seemed difficult, as if moving on land was hard for it. The three men, frozen in terror for what they later estimated was about 30 seconds, but felt like forever, finally broke and ran for their car. They didn't grab their fishing gear, didn't pack up their supplies, just ran. They could hear the creature following them, those heavy footsteps getting closer. They reached the car, piled in, and one of them, hands shaking so badly he could barely get the key in the ignition, finally started the engine. As they sped away, looking back through the rear window, they could see the creature standing in the road behind them, those green eyes still visible in the darkness. Then it turned and walked back toward the lake, disappearing into the water with barely a splash. The men drove straight to the Ashland County Sheriff's Office and reported what they'd seen. The deputy who took their statement noted that all three men were genuinely terrified, pale, and shaking. These weren't kids looking for attention or drunk college students playing a prank. These were grown men, clearly traumatized by whatever they'd encountered. The sheriff's department investigated the site the next day. They found the men's fishing equipment right where they left it in their panic. They also found tracks in the mud near the water's edge. Large, unusual prints that showed clear webbing between the toe marks. The tracks led from the woods across the beach area where the encounter happened and straight into the water where they disappeared. Skeptics immediately jumped on the obvious explanation. What these men saw was simply a bear. Black bears were becoming more common in Ohio at that time as populations recovered, and in poor lighting, a bear standing on its hind legs might look human-like. But there are problems with that explanation. First, the height. 11 feet is far too tall for any black bear in Ohio. Second, the webbed feet. Bears don't have webbed feet. Third, the description of the creature moving into the water and disappearing with barely a ripple doesn't match bear behavior at all. Could it have been a hoax? The men could have made up the story, but for what purpose? They faced ridicule and doubt. Their story made them the subject of jokes around Ashland County. If it was a hoax, they committed to it completely and gained nothing from it. Some researchers have guessed that what these men saw might have been some kind of water-dwelling human-like being, possibly related to the Loveland Frogman or other water cryptids reported in the region. The webbed feet and the creature's apparent comfort in water would support this theory. The Charles Mill Lake area does connect through various waterways to other parts of Ohio where water cryptids have been reported. The armless aspect is especially puzzling. Some witnesses to water-dwelling human-like beings report that the creatures keep their arms tight against their bodies when moving, which might give the appearance of being armless in poor lighting. Others suggest that if this was some kind of unknown water species, it might have evolved without traditional arms, developing other ways of moving and handling things underwater. The glowing green eyes are another mystery. Bioluminescence exists in nature, especially in deep-sea creatures. But an 11-foot-tall land or amphibious creature with glowing eyes, that's not something science currently recognizes as existing. There have been a handful of other reports over the years from the Charles Mill Lake area. Fishermen have reported seeing something large moving beneath the surface in areas where the water is too shallow for most fish. Campers have heard strange sounds coming from the lake at night, described as somewhere between a croak and a low moan, but nothing has ever matched the detail and terror of that March 1959 encounter. The Charles Mill Lake Monster remains one of Ohio's most bizarre and unexplained cryptid cases. The witnesses stuck to their story for decades, never changing their description, never admitting to a hoax. Whatever came out of that lake in 1959, it was something that three grown men couldn't explain, and something that left physical evidence that couldn't easily be dismissed. Chapter 9, The Peninsula Python. Time to talk about a cryptid that's a bit more straightforward than some of the others we've covered, but no less terrifying for the people who encountered it. The Peninsula Python was, according to reports from 1944, a massive snake that terrorized the small town of Peninsula in Summit County. We're talking about a 20-foot-long snake that left behind evidence of its presence and then vanished as mysteriously as it appeared. Peninsula, in 1944, was even smaller and more rural than it is today. The town sits in the Cuyahoga Valley, surrounded by thick forests and farmland. It's beautiful country, but it's also the kind of place where wildlife encounters are part of daily life. Farmers were used to dealing with foxes getting into chicken coops, deer eating their crops, maybe the occasional black bear passing through. But nobody was prepared for what showed up in the summer of 1944. The first sign that something unusual was in the area came when local farmers started finding their chicken coops empty. Not just a few chickens missing, but whole flocks gone, sometimes 20 or 30 birds in a single night. The strange thing was, there was no sign of forced entry, no scattered feathers suggesting a struggle, no blood. The chickens were simply gone. Then came the tracks. Massive snake tracks, showing a body width of about 12 to 14 inches, pressed into the soft earth near the coops, and leading off into the woods. These weren't little garter snake trails. These were the tracks of something huge, leaving deep impressions that suggested enormous weight. Farmers who followed the tracks reported that they led through the underbrush and into the more remote areas of the valley. The first actual sighting of the creature came in mid-July, when a farmer named Robert Pulaski was working in his field near dusk. He heard a rustling in the tall grass at the edge of his property and turned to see what he at first thought was a fallen log moving through the vegetation. But logs don't move on their own. As he watched, he realized he was looking at a snake. But unlike any snake he'd ever seen in Ohio, the creature was at least 20 feet long, maybe longer, with a body as thick as a man's thigh. Its scales were a dark olive-green color, and as it moved, Pulaski could see the powerful muscles rippling beneath the skin. The snake was moving with purpose. Not the wandering path you might expect from a snake just traveling through an area, but with direction, as if it knew exactly where it was going. Pulaski wisely didn't approach the creature. He watched it disappear into the woods, and then immediately went to tell his neighbors what he'd seen. Within days, other residents reported their own sightings. A woman hanging laundry saw the snake sunning itself on a rock outcropping near the Cuyahoga River. A group of children playing near the woods ran home screaming after seeing what they described as a tree trunk with scales moving through the underbrush. The sightings created something close to panic in Peninsula. Parents kept their children inside. Farmers started carrying firearms when doing their work. Local hunters organized search parties to try to find and kill the creature. The story made regional newspapers with headlines like "Monster, Snake Terrorizes Ohio Town," and "Peninsula Python Prowls Valley." But here's where the story takes an interesting turn. Despite all the searching, nobody could find the snake. The search parties found tracks, found areas where something large had clearly rested in the underbrush, even found what appeared to be shed skin, though the pieces were too damaged to identify for sure. But the creature itself remained hard to find. The chicken disappearances stopped in mid-August and the sightings faded. The last reported encounter was in early September when a fisherman on the Cuyahoga River reported seeing something huge moving beneath the surface, creating a wake that seemed far too large for any fish in the river. After that, nothing. The peninsula python, if that's what it really was, simply vanished. So, what was the peninsula python? The most obvious explanation is that it was a pet snake, probably a python or a boa constrictor, that had either escaped or been let go by its owner. Large constrictor snakes were less common as pets in the 1940s than they are today, but they weren't unheard of. A 20-foot python would be unusually large, but not impossible. Reticulated pythons and anacondas can reach those lengths. The problem with that theory is survival. Ohio's climate is not good for tropical snakes. Even in summer, nighttime temperatures can drop a lot, and a large constrictor would struggle to keep its body temperature. It's possible the snake survived the summer months, but couldn't have made it through a northeast Ohio winter. Yet, there were no reports of finding a dead giant snake in the fall or following spring. Could it have been a native Ohio snake that was simply much larger than usual? The largest native snakes in Ohio are black rat snakes, which can reach 8 feet in rare cases, and the eastern fox snake, which maxes out around 6 feet. Neither comes close to 20 feet. And the tracks and descriptions don't match these species. Some cryptozoologists have suggested the peninsula python might have been a surviving population of some prehistoric snake species or possibly an unknown species that occasionally comes out from deeper parts of the Cuyahoga Valley. The valley does have caves and deep ravines where a creature could potentially hide, and the river system could allow something to move long distances without being seen. The shed skin that was found is particularly frustrating from a research standpoint. If it had been saved and studied, it could have provided clear answers about what species of snake was in Peninsula. But remember, this was 1944. DNA analysis didn't exist. And local farmers weren't thinking about scientific documentation. They were thinking about protecting their livestock and families. The Peninsula python case remains one of Ohio's most interesting cryptid mysteries. Precisely because it's so straightforward. No glowing eyes, no supernatural elements, just reports of a very large snake where no very large snake should be. Whether it was an escaped pet, a misidentified natural occurrence, or something truly unknown, it left its mark on Peninsula's history. Old-timers in the area still talk about the summer of 1944, when something huge slithered through the valley and then disappeared without a trace. Chapter 10. The Cedar Bog Monster. The Cedar Bog Monster, sometimes called the Wild Man of the Bog, is tied to one of Ohio's most unique natural features, Cedar Bog in Urbana. And before we dive into the creature itself, we need to talk about the bog because this place is special. First off, despite the name, Cedar Bog isn't actually a bog. It's a fen, which is a type of wetland fed by groundwater rather than surface water. But more importantly, It's a leftover from the last ice age. Cedar bog has existed in some form for over 18,000 years, making it one of the oldest continuously existing ecosystems in Ohio. The water that feeds it is cold, staying at a constant temperature, and this has allowed plant and animal species that typically exist much farther north to survive here, isolated from their main populations. The bog is home to rare orchids, meat-eating plants, and numerous species that shouldn't exist this far south. It's a truly otherworldly place, with boardwalks winding through terrain that seems more suited to the Canadian wilderness than central Ohio. And according to local legend, it's also home to something else. Something that predates modern human settlement in the area. Something that the native peoples of the region knew about long before European settlers arrived. The earliest written accounts of the Cedar Bog Monster come from the late 1800s, though oral traditions from the Shawnee and other tribes suggest the stories go back much further. The creature is described as a large, hairy ape-like, or human-like figure, standing between 7 and 9 feet tall, covered in matted, reddish-brown or dark brown hair. Witnesses describe a strong, unpleasant smell, like rotting plants mixed with wet animal fur, that often comes before sightings of the creature. But what really makes the Cedar Bog Monster stand out is the mist. Multiple witnesses over the years have reported that encounters with the creature are preceded by the appearance of a thick, greenish-colored mist that seems to come out of nowhere. This mist rolls across the bog low to the ground and carries with it that distinctive smell. Then, through the mist, the creature appears. One of the most detailed accounts comes from 1968, when a group of biology students from a nearby college visited Cedar Bog on a field trip. They were studying the unique plant life when one of the students noticed the mist beginning to form. Their professor, an experienced botanist who'd worked at the bog for years, immediately became nervous and told the students they needed to leave. When the students asked why, the professor reluctantly explained that the mist sometimes came before sightings of something he couldn't explain. The students, being students, decided they wanted to wait and see what happened. As the mist got thicker, they began to smell that characteristic odor. Then, about 50 yards away across the fen, they saw a figure come out from the tree line. The creature was enormous, hunched, but still standing taller than any human, moving through the shallow water of the bog with a slow, deliberate walk. It seemed to be searching for something, occasionally bending down to the water surface. The students watched for several minutes, some of them trying to take photographs, though the mist made clear images nearly impossible. Then the creature, seeming to sense their presence, turned and looked directly at them. Even through the mist and at that distance, they could see its eyes, which they described as very dark, almost black, with an intelligence that was deeply unsettling. The creature didn't come toward them. Instead, it turned and walked back into the forest, disappearing into the underbrush. The mist began to fade almost immediately, as if it had only existed to announce the creature's presence. Park rangers and naturalists who work at Cedar Bog will tell you, usually off the record, that there's something in those woods that they can't quite explain. Tracks have been found, large two-legged prints, that don't match any known animal. There have been sounds recorded, strange calls that sound somewhere between human and animal, that sound experts have been unable to identify. And then there's the mist, which appears with no weather explanation, seems to have that distinctive greenish tint, and is always accompanied by that smell. Skeptics offer several explanations. Cedar Bog's unique microclimate could create unusual mist formations, and the smell could be natural gases from rotting plant matter in the fen. The creature itself could be misidentified bears, which do live in the area, or even people, poachers, or trespassers who don't want to be seen. The sounds could be known animals, just changed by the bog's unusual sound patterns. But here's what gives me pause. Cedar Bog is not a large area. It's about 450 acres, well studied, frequently visited by botanists and naturalists. If a bear or a person was responsible for these encounters, you'd expect more solid evidence. You'd expect rangers and researchers to have clearly identified what's causing the sightings. And yet, after over a century of reports, there's still no satisfying explanation. Some researchers believe that if the Cedar Bog Monster is real, it might be using the bog as a hiding place precisely because it's so isolated and unique. The cold water springs, the thick vegetation, the difficult terrain, all of this would make it an ideal hiding spot for a creature trying to avoid human contact. The fact that the bog is a leftover ecosystem, home to species that have existed there since the Ice Age, opens the interesting possibility that the creature itself could be a leftover population of something that once lived across a much wider area. The greenish mist remains the most mysterious aspect of these encounters. Some guess it could be the creature's way of marking territory, some kind of secretion or emission that creates the visual effect. Others think the mist might be a purely natural thing that happens to occur in the same areas where the creature hunts or travels, making it seem connected when it's actually just chance. Whatever the truth, the cedar bog monster represents something important about cryptid lore. It's not just about the creature itself, but about the places these creatures are said to live. Cedar bog is a place that exists outside of normal time, in a way, an ice age left over, where northern species still thrive, where the water runs cold, even in summer, where mist forms without warning. It's exactly the kind of place where you'd expect something ancient and unknown to survive. Local residents in Obana have a healthy respect for the bog and for the stories surrounding it. Some refuse to visit the area alone or after dark. Others brush off the whole thing as superstition and folklore. But ask anyone who's lived in the area for decades and they'll tell you they know someone who's seen something strange near Cedar Bog. They might not call it a monster. They might just say they saw something in the woods that didn't quite make sense. But the stories continue, passed down through generations, growing with each telling. Chapter 11. The Crosswick Monster. Alright, we're going back in time now, way back to 1882, to a small community called Crosswick, in Warren County. This is one of Ohio's oldest and most disturbing cryptid encounters, and it involves something that modern cryptozoology still can't quite classify. We're talking about a 14-foot-long reptile-like beast that tried to drag a child into a hollow tree. Yeah, this one's going to get dark. Crosswick, in 1882, was a rural farming community, the kind of place where everyone knew everyone and news traveled fast. On a summer day in July, a young boy about 10 years old was playing near the woods at the edge of his family's property. He was doing what kids did back then, exploring, maybe looking for interesting rocks or watching birds, just enjoying a day outside. What happened next would traumatize not just the boy, but the entire community. The boy heard something moving in the underbrush, a heavy scraping sound. He turned to see what he later described as a monster coming out of a hollow tree. The creature was enormous, at least 14 feet long from head to tail, with a thick, muscular body covered in dark leathery scales. Its head was long, almost crocodile-like, but the proportions were all wrong. The legs were too long, too powerful, and it moved with a speed that reptiles that size shouldn't have. Before the boy could react, the creature lunged at him. It grabbed him, not with its mouth, but with its front legs or arms. Witnesses would later disagree on exactly what to call them. The creature began dragging the screaming child back toward the hollow tree from which it had come. The boy fought, kicking and screaming, grabbing at grass and roots, anything to slow the creature down. His screams brought help. His father and several neighbors working in nearby fields heard the commotion and came running. What they saw was something out of a nightmare. This massive reptile-like beast, unlike anything they'd ever encountered, dragging the boy across the ground toward a huge hollow oak tree at the edge of the woods. The men didn't hesitate. They grabbed whatever they had on hand, pitchforks, axes, shovels, and they charged the creature. The beast, seeing multiple adult humans coming at it with weapons, let go of the boy and turned to face them. For a moment, there was a standoff. The creature, its mouth open, showing rows of teeth, hissing or making some kind of deep sound, face to face with half a dozen armed farmers. Then the creature did something unexpected. It retreated, but not into the woods like you might expect from a wild animal. It backed into that hollow tree, disappearing into the darkness within. The men reached the tree and looked inside, shining lanterns into the hole. The tree was hollow all the way down, deeper than they could see, and there was no sign of the creature. The boy was badly scratched and bruised from being dragged across the ground, but otherwise physically okay. Mentally, though, he was traumatized. He refused to go near the woods for years afterward. His description of the creature was consistent every time he was asked. Long, reptile-like, with scales like a snake, but legs like a lizard, bigger than any animal he'd ever seen. And those eyes, yellow with vertical pupils, looking at him with what he swore was intelligence. The men returned with more help, more weapons, and more lights. They were determined to find and kill whatever had attacked the child. They cut into the hollow tree, trying to reach the bottom of the hole. What they found was a network of tunnels, old root systems, and natural passages that led deep underground. They followed as far as they could, but the passages became too narrow and dangerous. Whatever had been in that tree, it was long gone. Word spread throughout Warren County. Hunting parties were organized. The woods around Crosswick were searched thoroughly. Other farmers reported livestock going missing in the weeks before. Chickens, goats, even a calf. But everyone had assumed it was coyotes or wild dogs. Now they weren't so sure. There were a few other reported sightings over the next several weeks. A farmer claimed he saw something large and reptile-like moving through his cornfield at dusk. Another resident reported hearing strange hissing and scraping sounds coming from the woods at night. But no one else had a close encounter like the boys' attack. And by fall, the sightings stopped entirely. So, what was the Crosswick Monster? The most obvious comparison is to a large lizard or monitor species. But 14 feet is huge, larger than any monitor lizard native to North America. Alligators can reach those lengths, but in 1882, there were no alligators in Ohio, and the description doesn't match an alligator anyway. Plus, alligators don't usually try to pull prey into trees. Some researchers have suggested it could have been a surviving population of some prehistoric reptile, a leftover species that managed to exist in isolated pockets. The tunnel system found beneath the hollow tree adds believability to the idea that something could live underground, coming out only sometimes to hunt. Ohio does have large cave systems and underground waterways that could support hidden populations of animals. The more skeptical explanation is that the boy was attacked by a large dog or maybe a bear, and in his terror, his mind turned what he saw into something more monstrous. The problem with that theory is the other witnesses. Multiple grown men, experienced farmers who knew the local wildlife, saw this creature. They described it consistently as reptile-like, not mammal-like. These were people who could tell the difference between a bear and something else entirely. There's also the detail about the hollow tree and the tunnel system. That's very specific and very strange. If this was just a frightened child mistaking an animal, why would the men find those extensive underground passages? Why would the creature retreat into them rather than just running into the woods? The Crosswick Monster case was widely reported in local newspapers at the time. The Cincinnati Enquirer ran a story about it, and it was discussed in several Ohio papers. This wasn't just local folklore that got written down decades later. This was documented as it happened, with multiple witnesses going on record. The incident left a lasting mark on Crosswick. That hollow tree became a local landmark, a place people avoided, especially after dark. Parents used the story to keep their children from wandering into the woods alone. And every so often, someone would report seeing something strange near those woods, though never again with the detail and terror of that July day in 1882. The Crosswick Monster represents something important in Ohio's cryptid history. It's one of the earliest well-documented encounters, and it involves a type of creature, a large reptile-like predator that doesn't fit neatly into any known category. Whether it was a genuine unknown species, a misidentified known animal, or something that doesn't have an easy explanation, it remains one of the most disturbing cryptid encounters in Ohio's history. Chapter 12. Orange Eyes. Time to talk about a legend that's part cryptid, part ghost story, and entirely terrifying. Orange Eyes, or, as it's sometimes called, the Mansfield Horror, is connected to a specific location. An old lover's lane near the Ruggles Road area, just outside Mansfield in Richland County. And this isn't your typical cryptid story, where you might catch a glimpse of something strange and then it disappears. This is about a creature that seems to actively hunt people, especially young couples, who make the mistake of parking in the wrong place at the wrong time. The basic legend goes like this. There's a spot along an old abandoned stretch of Ruggles Road surrounded by thick forest where couples used to park back in the 1960s and 70s. It was secluded, private, the kind of place teenagers went when they wanted to be alone. But something lived in those woods. Something that didn't like visitors. And that something had eyes that glowed bright orange, visible from hundreds of feet away through the darkness. The first widely reported encounter happened in the early 1960s. A young couple had driven out to the area, parked their car, and were talking when they noticed two orange lights in the woods. At first, they thought it might be someone with a flashlight, maybe another car's headlights reflecting off something, but the lights didn't move like flashlights. They just hung there in the darkness, steady and unblinking. Then the lights started getting closer. The couple watched, getting more and more nervous as these two bright orange orbs moved through the forest toward their car. They could hear something moving through the underbrush now. Heavy footsteps, branches breaking, and they could hear breathing, deep and rough. Like whatever was coming had just run a long distance. The lights, the eyes, got close enough that in the glow from the car's interior light, they could see something of the creature's shape. Massive, at least 7 or 8 feet tall, covered in dark hair or fur with a build that suggested incredible strength. But it was those eyes that really got to them. They didn't just reflect light like animal eyes do. They gave off their own orange glow, bright enough to light up the creature's face, which witnesses described as somewhere between ape and human, but not quite either. The couple, showing more sense than many people in these situations, started their car and got out of there. As they drove away, they could see those orange eyes in their rearview mirror, still watching them from the edge of the woods. Both reported feeling an overwhelming sense of dread, a primal fear that stayed with them long after they'd reached safety. Word spread through the high school and the local teenage community, as these things do, and instead of keeping people away, it made the location more popular because teenagers, as we've established, make questionable decisions. Couples would drive out to Ruggles Road, specifically hoping to see orange eyes, turning it into a kind of dare or rite of passage. Many of them got more than they bargained for. Throughout the 1960s and into the 70s, there were dozens of reported encounters. The pattern was always similar. Couples would park, the orange lights would appear in the woods, and something large and powerful would approach the car. Some witnesses reported the creature actually reaching the car, pressing against the windows, rocking the vehicle. Others reported it circling the car, those eyes always visible, always watching. What made orange eyes particularly terrifying was the apparent intelligence it showed. This wasn't just a curious animal checking out something new in its territory. Witnesses described feeling like they were being hunted, like the creature was deliberately terrorizing them. It would appear suddenly, cutting off their escape route. It would pace back and forth as if deciding whether to attack. And it seemed to understand that cars offered protection, because it would often try to stop people from reaching their vehicles. One especially frightening encounter from 1972 involved a couple whose car broke down on Ruggles Road. They were trying to fix it when they saw the orange eyes appear. The creature came closer, and they locked themselves in the car. For over an hour, they sat there while orange eyes circled the vehicle, occasionally hitting it hard enough to rock it on its suspension. The man tried to start the car multiple times, but it wouldn't turn over. Finally, as dawn began to break, the orange eyes went back into the woods, and the car mysteriously started on the first try. Local police were called to the area many times during this period. Officers would patrol Ruggles Road, responding to panicked calls from teenagers who'd encountered something in the woods. While most officers were doubtful, treating these as overactive imaginations or pranks, a few had their own encounters. One deputy reported seeing the orange eyes himself while checking out a call. He described them as unlike anything he'd seen from a known animal, too bright, too steady, and too far apart to be a normal creature's eyes. By the late 1970s, sightings began to decrease. The area became less popular as a lover's lane, partly because of the legend, and partly because development in the area made it less secluded. But even today, people occasionally report seeing strange orange lights in the woods near the old Ruggles Road area. Hikers and hunters sometimes report an overwhelming feeling of being watched. And those distinctive orange eyes have been spotted on security cameras from nearby properties, though the footage is always too blurry or distant to show anything clearly. So, what is orange eyes? The description, a large hairy two-legged creature, suggests some connection to the Grassman or other Bigfoot-type cryptids. But the eyes are what make it different. Most Bigfoot reports describe eyes that reflect light, glowing red or yellow in flashlight beams or headlights. Orange eyes actively glows, giving off its own light, and that bright orange color is unusual in cryptid reports. Some researchers have suggested orange eyes might be a different species entirely, or maybe a unique individual with some kind of bioluminescence. Others think it could be a supernatural entity rather than a flesh and blood creature, given the way it seems to appear and disappear, and the intense psychological effect it has on witnesses. The skeptical explanation is that orange eyes is purely psychological, a legend that became self-fulfilling. Teenagers expecting to see something scary would interpret any light or sound as the creature, creating a cycle of reported sightings. The problem with that explanation is how consistent the reports are, and the fact that some witnesses, including law enforcement, weren't expecting to see anything and were genuinely frightened by their encounters. Orange eyes remains one of Mansfield's most lasting legends. The old Ruggles Road area still has a reputation, and locals will tell you that some places just feel wrong, feel dangerous, whether you believe in cryptids or not. And on dark nights, people still occasionally report seeing two bright orange lights in the woods, watching, waiting, just like they did over 60 years ago. Chapter 13. The Green-Clawed Beast. Let's head to the Ohio River, because Ohio's cryptids aren't limited to land and lakes. We need to talk about one of the most terrifying water encounters in the state's history, the Green-Clawed Beast. This is the story of a woman who went for a swim and nearly didn't come back up, pulled down by something with claws that witnesses described as bright green and very, very sharp. It's the summer of 1955, and we're near the small community of East Liverpool, right on the Ohio River. The river was a popular spot for swimming back then, though people today might think twice about jumping in, given what we know about water quality. But in 1955, on a hot summer day, the cool water of the river was the place to be. A woman named Mrs. Darwin Johnson was swimming near the shore in an area where the water was only about 4 or 5 feet deep. She was a strong swimmer, had grown up near the river, knew it well. She was just enjoying a relaxing swim when she felt something grab her leg. Not like getting tangled in a fishing line or caught on a sunken log, but grabbed by something with fingers or claws that dug into her flesh. Mrs. Johnson tried to pull away, but whatever had her was strong. She felt herself being pulled down, dragged under the water. She fought, kicking and thrashing, trying to reach the surface. She managed to get her head above water long enough to scream for help before being pulled under again. Her friends on the shore saw her struggling and immediately realized something was wrong. One of them, a man who was also a strong swimmer, dove in to help. When he reached Mrs. Johnson, he could see something in the murky water, something large and dark holding onto her leg. He grabbed her arms and pulled, taking part in a literal tug-of-war with whatever had her. The creature, and that's what everyone involved would later insist it was, a creature, not a fish or an animal they could identify, suddenly let go. Mrs. Johnson was pulled to safety, and her rescuer got a glimpse of something moving away through the water. He described it as roughly human-shaped, but moving too fast and too smoothly to be a person. And he saw the hands, or claws, bright green, clearly visible even in the murky river water. Mrs. Johnson was pulled onto the shore, conscious, but in shock. Her leg was badly scratched. Deep cuts that clearly came from something with claws or very sharp nails. The scratches were arranged in a pattern that suggested a hand-like appendage with marks from what appeared to be 4 digits. Not 5 like a human hand, but for long fingers or claws. And here's the disturbing detail. The scratches had a strange greenish tint to them, as if whatever had made them had left some kind of residue behind. She was taken to the local doctor who treated the wounds. The doctor, a man who'd practiced medicine in the area for decades, was puzzled by the injuries. The wounds didn't match anything he'd seen from river accidents, from boat propellers, from fish, or from any known river danger. The pattern was too deliberate, too controlled, and that green discoloration, he'd never seen anything like it. Word of the attack spread quickly through the community. Other swimmers came forward with their own stories, things they'd brushed off or not reported before. One man said he'd felt something grab his foot while swimming a few weeks earlier, but he'd managed to kick free. A woman reported seeing a large dark shape in the water that moved against the current with what seemed like purposeful swimming. Children playing in shallow water reported feeling like something was watching them from deeper areas. The local newspaper ran the story and it caught regional attention. Woman attacked by river monster, read one headline. Investigators, mostly local volunteers and amateur naturalists, tried to figure out what could have attacked Mrs. Johnson. They considered and ruled out various possibilities. Snapping turtles, which can have sharp claws. But the pattern didn't match, and snappers don't usually attack swimmers. Muskellunge, or other large fish, but fish don't have claws or hand-like parts. A person, but the strength needed to drag a grown woman underwater, and the underwater movement ruled that out. Mrs. Johnson herself was certain about what she felt. She'd been grabbed by something with a hand, not a mouth or a fin, but digits that wrapped around her leg. She felt the claws pierce her skin, and in that brief moment when she was underwater being dragged down, she saw it. She described something that was human-like in shape with a torso, arms, and what appeared to be legs, though she couldn't see them clearly. The skin was dark, almost black or very dark green, and smooth, not scaly, but not like human skin either. And the face in the murky water. She couldn't see details, but she got an impression of something that wasn't quite human, with eyes that seemed too large and a mouth that was all wrong. In the days following the attack, the area of the river where it happened was avoided by swimmers. Some brave or foolish individuals went looking for the creature, diving with spear guns or trying to lure it out. Nothing was found. The creature, if it was still in the area, stayed hidden. The green-clawed beast, as it came to be known, was reported occasionally over the following years. In 1959, 2 fishermen reported seeing something with a human-like shaped surface briefly near their boat before diving back down. In 1963, a child claimed something tried to grab him while he was wading, but he made it to shore before it could get a good hold. Each report mentioned the same features: the vaguely human shape, the incredible strength, and those distinctive green claws. Cryptozoologists have guessed that the green-clawed beast might be related to other water-dwelling human-like reports from around the country. Similar creatures have been reported in various rivers and lakes, often described as having amphibian or reptile-like traits, combined with a human-like body plan. Some researchers have suggested these could be an unknown species of large salamander or amphibian that has evolved features that make it appear more human-like than we'd expect. The green color of the claws is especially interesting. Some water creatures do have green coloring due to algae growth or diet, but claws that leave a green residue in wounds, that's unusual. It suggests either some kind of secretion, possibly poisonous, or maybe the claws themselves are made of some material that breaks down into the wound. Mrs. Johnson carried the scars from her encounter for the rest of her life. She never went back in the Ohio River. She never doubted what had grabbed her that day. And when people would ask her about it, she'd show them the scars and simply say, "There's something in that river that shouldn't be there." The green-clawed beast remains one of Ohio's most frightening cryptids because of how deeply terrifying the encounter was. This wasn't seeing something at a distance and wondering what it was. This was being attacked, being pulled underwater, feeling those claws dig into your flesh. It's the kind of encounter that leaves no room for doubt in the victim's mind, no matter what skeptics might say. Chapter 14. The Pukwudgie. Now, we're going to dive into something a bit different. A cryptid that comes from Native American folklore, but is still reportedly seen in Ohio today. Meet the Pukwudgie. Small, mischievous, incredibly dangerous human-like creatures that, according to legend, have lived in this land far longer than any European settler. And if you think small means harmless, you're in for a surprise, because these things are supposedly responsible for deaths, disappearances, and more than a few people wandering out of the woods with no memory of how they got there. The Pukwudgie comes from the folklore of various Native American tribes, particularly the Wampanoag people of the Northeast. But versions of these creatures appear in the traditions of many tribes, including those that historically lived in Ohio. The name roughly means person of the wilderness or little wild man of the woods. They're described as standing between 2 and 3 feet tall, roughly human-like in shape, but with exaggerated features. Large noses, oversized ears, and fingers that end in sharp points. But here's where it gets weird. Some descriptions say Pukwudgies are covered in short gray hair that looks like porcupine quills. Others describe them as having smooth grayish skin. Some say they glow faintly in darkness. The differences in descriptions might be because there are different types of Pukwudgies, or it might be because these creatures are, according to legend, shapeshifters capable of changing how they look. In Ohio, Pukwudgie sightings are concentrated around ancient Native American sites, particularly near the Serpent Mound in Adams County. Serpent Mound is a mysterious effigy mound built by indigenous peoples possibly between 300 BCE and 100 CE. It's a sacred site, an archaeological treasure, and according to locals, a place where the line between our world and something else is thinner than it should be. Visitors to Serpent Mound and the surrounding area have reported encounters with small human-like figures for decades. These aren't your cute fairy tale creatures. Witnesses describe feeling an overwhelming sense of dread when they spot Pukwudgies. The creatures are often seen at dusk or dawn, moving through the woods with unnatural speed. They disappear and reappear, making it nearly impossible to follow their movement. One common report involves hikers on trails near ancient mound sites who feel like they're being followed or watched. They'll catch glimpses of small figures darting between trees, always just at the edge of their vision. Some people report hearing voices, whispers in a language they don't understand, or laughter that sounds mean and mocking. Others report objects going missing from their backpacks, only to show up later in impossible places. But Pukwudgies aren't just tricksters. According to Native American tradition and modern reports, they're dangerous. They're said to be able to create fire from nothing, to shoot invisible arrows that cause pain or sickness, and to lure people off trails and into dangerous areas where they become lost or hurt. Some legends say Pukwudgies can possess people, controlling their actions. Others say they can create illusions, making people see things that aren't there or miss things that are. There's a particularly disturbing account from the late 1990s involving a group of teenagers who decided to camp near one of the smaller mounds in southern Ohio. They set up their camp as the sun was setting and built a fire. As darkness fell, they started hearing sounds from the woods around them. Footsteps, whispers, and what sounded like small objects being thrown at their tent. One of the teenagers claimed to see a small figure standing just outside the ring of firelight, watching them. When he shined his flashlight toward it, the figure was gone. Throughout the night, they had the sense of being surrounded, of multiple small beings moving around their campsite, just beyond what they could see. In the morning, they found their supplies had been messed with. Food was missing from sealed containers. Their car keys, which had been in a zippered pocket of a backpack, were found hanging from a tree branch 20 feet away. Most disturbing, one member of the group couldn't remember anything from the night before. His last memory was sitting by the fire, and his next memory was waking up in his sleeping bag in the morning. The others said he'd been there all night, but he'd been acting strange, speaking in a voice that didn't sound like his own, saying things that didn't make sense. Park rangers and people who work at Serpent Mound and other ancient sites in Ohio will tell you, usually quietly and only if they trust you, that strange things happen in these places. Equipment malfunctions for no reason. People become lost on trails they've walked hundreds of times. There are spots where animals refuse to go, where plants grow in strange patterns, where the air feels different. One ranger I came across in my research, who worked at a site near Serpent Mound for over 20 years, said he'd seen the Pukagees 3 times. Small grayish figures, no more than 3 feet tall, watching from the woods. He said the first time he saw one, he thought it was a child who'd wandered from their parents. He called out, tried to approach, and the figure just vanished. Not ran away, vanished. He checked the area where it had been standing and found small human-like footprints in the dirt. But they stopped suddenly, as if whatever made them had simply stopped existing. From a cryptozoological standpoint, Pukagees are fascinating because they blur the line between folklore and flesh and blood creatures. Are they undiscovered primates, some kind of unknown small human-like being that has learned to avoid human contact? That doesn't explain the reported supernatural abilities, the vanishing, the possession, the fire starting, unless those aspects are exaggerations added to encounters with something more ordinary. Or are Pukagees something else entirely? Some researchers in paranormal fields suggest they might be beings from another dimension, entities that exist alongside our reality but occasionally cross over, especially in places of spiritual or historical importance, like the ancient mounds. That would explain why they seem to appear and disappear, why they're linked with specific locations, and why encounters with them feel different from encounters with normal flesh and blood animals. The skeptical explanation is that Pukagees are purely folklore. Stories passed down through generations that people interpret as real when they have perfectly ordinary experiences in the woods. Strange sounds are just wildlife. Feelings of being watched are just our primitive brains being overly cautious. And glimpses of small figures are misidentified animals, or even just shadows and light playing tricks. But talk to people who've had encounters, especially those who grew up hearing Native American traditions about Pukagees, and they'll tell you these creatures are very real. They'll tell you that some places in Ohio have always been home to things that humans don't fully understand. And they'll advise you quite seriously to show respect when visiting ancient sites, to leave offerings if you know the traditions, and to get out of the woods before dark. The Pukagees serves as a reminder that Ohio's cryptid landscape includes more than just large physical creatures. It includes beings from folklore and legend that refuse to stay safely in the past, that continue to be reported by modern witnesses, and that challenge our understanding of what's possible in the natural world. Chapter 15. The Gallipolis Wild Man. We need to go way back in Ohio's history, all the way to 1869, for what might be one of the earliest documented Bigfoot encounters in American history. This is the story of the Gallipolis Wild Man, and it's important for 2 reasons. First, it happened decades before the term Bigfoot was even created, meaning the witnesses weren't influenced by modern cryptid culture. Second, this wasn't just a sighting. This was an attack, a violent confrontation that left physical evidence and terrified witnesses. Gallipolis in 1869 was a small river town on the Ohio River, settled mainly by French immigrants in the late 1700s. It was a civilized place, with schools, churches, and businesses, not some wild frontier outpost. So when something attacked a carriage on a well-traveled road near the town, it sent shockwaves through the community. The incident happened on a summer evening. A family, the Shoemakers, were traveling by carriage along a road that ran through a wooded area just outside Gallipolis. It was late afternoon, still light out, which makes this case particularly interesting because most Bigfoot encounters happen at night or in low light conditions. The Shoemakers included the father, mother, and their 2 children, and they were simply making the trip back home from visiting relatives in town. As they entered a particularly thick section of woods, their horse suddenly became agitated. Horses, for all their size, are prey animals and have excellent instincts for danger. This horse started showing signs of panic, trying to bolt despite the driver's attempts to calm it. Then they saw why. Coming out from the tree line was what witnesses described as a wild man, a creature that stood upright like a human, but was clearly not human. The figure was huge, estimated at 7 to 8 feet tall, with a powerful broad-shouldered build. It was entirely covered in dark matted hair, so thick that it was impossible to see the skin beneath. The face, what they could see of it, was described as rough and up-like, with a flat nose, heavy brow ridge, and a mouth that seemed too wide. The creature didn't run away from the carriage as a normal animal might. Instead, it approached, and then it attacked. The creature grabbed the side of the carriage, actually gripped it with what appeared to be hands rather than paws, and began shaking it violently. Mrs. Shoemaker screamed. The children were crying. Mr. Shoemaker tried to control the panicking horse, while also trying to fight off this creature with his driving whip. The wild man, showing remarkable strength, actually managed to tip the carriage onto 2 wheels. The family genuinely believed they were about to be overturned. Mr. Shoemaker, in desperation, managed to hit the creature several times with his whip. Whether the blows hurt it or just annoyed it enough to make it lose interest, the creature let go of the carriage and let out what witnesses described as a horrible scream, somewhere between human and animal, a sound of rage or frustration. The family didn't wait around to see what the creature would do next. They got that terrified horse moving and fled the area at top speed. As they looked back, they could see the wild man standing in the middle of the road, watching them leave. They went straight to the authorities in Gallipolis. At first, officials were doubtful, thinking maybe the family had encountered a wanderer, or maybe a disturbed person living in the woods. But when they examined the carriage, they found damage that matched the story. Deep scratches in the wood, where something with incredible strength had gripped it. And even more convincing, they found hair, thick, coarse hair, that didn't match any animal the locals could identify. A search party was organized the next day. Dozens of men, some armed, went into the woods where the encounter had happened. They found evidence that something large had been in the area. Trees were found with bark stripped off at heights of 7 to 8 feet. Large human-like footprints were discovered in soft earth near a creek. Prints that measured over a foot long and showed clear toe marks. And they found what appeared to be a bedding area, a section of flattened plants where something large had apparently been sleeping. But they never found the wild man itself. The creature, if it was still in the area, had hidden too well or moved on. The search continued for several days. But eventually, people returned to their normal lives, though many were now more careful when traveling through wooded areas. What makes the Gallipolis wild man case historically significant is the timing. This was 1869, decades before the Patterson-Gimlin film, before the term Bigfoot entered popular culture, before Sasquatch became a household name. The Shoemaker family had no cultural reference for what they'd encountered. They simply described what they saw, a large hairy man-like creature that attacked their carriage. The local newspaper, the Gallia Times, covered the story thoroughly. It wasn't treated as a joke or brushed off as fantasy. The reporters investigated seriously, interviewed witnesses, examined the physical evidence. This was reported as a genuine, unexplained event, something that needed attention and investigation. There were follow-up sightings in the Gallipolis area over the next few years. Farmers reported seeing a large, hairy figure watching them from tree lines. Hunters claimed to have heard strange sounds in the woods, howls and screams that didn't match any known animal. And there were more reports of livestock going missing or being found killed in ways that suggested something much larger than a coyote or even a bear. By the mid-1870s, the sightings faded and the Gallipolis wild man faded from immediate memory, though it remained part of local folklore. It wasn't until the modern Bigfoot phenomenon began in the mid-20th century that researchers looked back at historical accounts like this one and realized Ohio had been reporting these creatures for over a century. From a cryptozoological standpoint, the Gallipolis case is valuable precisely because it comes before the modern Bigfoot phenomenon. The witnesses weren't influenced by popular media or existing ideas about what a Bigfoot should look like. They simply reported what they experienced. And their description matches remarkably well with thousands of modern Bigfoot reports. The height, the build, the hair coverage, the apparent strength, the two-legged movement, even the aggressive territorial behavior. Skeptics might argue that the family encountered a bear, which can stand on hind legs and might appear human-like in silhouette. But the description doesn't match bear behavior or anatomy. Bears don't usually attack moving carriages. They don't grip objects with human-like hands, and the footprints found didn't match bear tracks. The Gallipolis wild man represents an important piece of Ohio's cryptid history and American cryptozoology in general. It shows that reports of large two-legged hairy human-like beings in North America go back much further than most people realize. And it raises the question, if people were seeing these creatures in 1869, before modern media could spread and influence such stories, What exactly were they seeing? Chapter 16. The Ohio River Sea Serpents. Alright, let's get back on the water. But this time, we're not talking about Lake Erie's Bessie. We're heading to the Ohio River for accounts of creatures that are different, and in some ways even stranger than their lake-dwelling relatives. Throughout the 19th century, the Ohio River had its own series of sea serpent sightings, creatures described with long necks, horse-like heads, and the disturbing ability to swim upstream against powerful currents. Something that shouldn't be physically possible for the creatures people were describing. The Ohio River, in the 1800s, was the lifeline of the region, a major transportation route for goods and people. Riverboat captains, ferrymen, and crew members spent their whole lives on that water. They knew every bend of the river, every sandbar, every type of fish and waterfowl. So when multiple experienced rivermen started reporting encounters with massive snake-like creatures that didn't fit any explanation, people paid attention. The first well-documented sighting happened in 1829. A riverboat captain named Harrison Taylor was piloting his vessel between Portsmouth and Maysville when he and his crew spotted something in the water ahead. At first, they thought it might be a log or debris floating downstream. But as they got closer, they realized it was moving against the current. The object, which they soon realized was a living creature, had a long neck rising about 4 feet above the water surface. The head, according to Captain Taylor's account, looked like a horse's head, but larger and with a more stretched out snout. The creature seemed to notice the approaching boat and dove beneath the surface. The crew got a brief glimpse of the body as it went under, describing it as snake-like, at least 30 to 40 feet long, dark in color, with what might have been a ridge or fin running along its back. What shocked Captain Taylor was the power and speed with which the creature moved. It shot through the water, leaving a wake that rocked his boat, despite the creature having just dove from the surface. This sighting was reported in several newspapers along the river, and it opened the floodgates for other witnesses to come forward with their own encounters. A ferryman near Wheeling reported seeing a similar creature in 1833. He described watching it for nearly 10 minutes. As it swam back and forth across the river, its long neck rising and falling, occasionally dipping its head into the water as if feeding. What made these sightings particularly believable was the consistency across multiple witnesses who had no contact with each other. The descriptions matched remarkably well: a snake-like body, dark coloring, a long neck, a horse-like head, powerful swimming ability, and that strange behavior of moving against the current, which shouldn't be possible for a creature of that size and shape, given the power of the Ohio River's flow. In 1845, there was an incident that nearly turned tragic. A family was crossing the river on a small ferry when something large struck the boat from below. The impact was strong enough to crack several boards and start the boat taking on water. As the ferryman frantically tried to steer toward shore, passengers reported seeing a long snake-like body surface briefly alongside the boat. One witness described seeing the head come up and said the creature seemed to be checking out the boat, almost curious about it. They made it to shore safely, and a look at the boat showed damage consistent with being hit by something large and hard, possibly the creature's head or body. There were also strange marks on the hull, scratches or scrapes that didn't match anything the ferryman had seen in his years of river work. Throughout the mid to late 1800s, reports continued. Fishermen would occasionally encounter these creatures, seeing them surface in the distance, or finding their nets damaged by something far too large and powerful to be a fish. In several cases, witnesses reported the creatures appearing to hunt, moving through the water with purpose, occasionally striking at fish or other prey. One particularly detailed sighting from 1867 involved multiple witnesses on the shore near Cincinnati. A group of people were watching the river when they spotted something that appeared to be two creatures, possibly a mating pair or a parent with young. The larger creature had its head and neck above water, while a smaller one, maybe half the size, swam nearby. Witnesses watched for over half an hour as the creatures moved upstream, seemingly untroubled by the current that would challenge most river animals. So, what were these Ohio River serpents? The obvious comparison is to plesiosaurs, those long-necked marine reptiles from the dinosaur age. The description certainly matches what we imagine a plesiosaur might look like. The long neck, the body shape, even the supposed fin or ridge. But plesiosaurs went extinct millions of years ago, and the idea of a breeding group surviving unnoticed into the 1800s in a river as heavily used as the Ohio stretches believed. Could they have been giant eels? Eels can grow quite large, and they're certainly snake-like. But even the largest eels don't have long necks and horse-like heads. They also don't swim with their heads raised above water, the way these creatures were consistently described. Some researchers have suggested they might have been large sturgeon, which do live in the Ohio River and can reach impressive sizes. Sturgeon have long snouts that from a distance or in poor visibility might look like a long neck, but the behavior doesn't match. Sturgeon don't swim with their heads above water, and the size estimates from witnesses far exceed even the largest sturgeon. There's also the possibility of mistaken identity of known animals in unusual situations. River currents can create strange visual effects. Floating debris, groups of fish, or waterfowl in formation might, under the right conditions, appear snake-like. But this explanation falls apart when you have experienced rivermen, people who spent their lives on the water, insisting they saw living creatures unlike anything else in the river. The most interesting aspect of the Ohio River serpent reports is that they stopped relatively suddenly by the early 1900s. As the river became more industrialized, more polluted, and more heavily used, the sightings ended. Some cryptozoologists suggest this is because, whatever these creatures were, they couldn't survive the changing conditions. Others think more human activity drove them away to more remote waterways, or that they died out completely. Occasionally, even in modern times, there are reports of something unusual in the Ohio River. In 2005, a fisherman near Madison, Indiana, reported seeing something with a long neck surface briefly before diving. In 2013, a family on a recreational boat reported an encounter with something large moving beneath their vessel in a section of river near Portsmouth. But these modern sightings are rare, nothing like the regular reports from the 1800s. The Ohio River sea serpents represent a fascinating chapter in Ohio's cryptid history. They were reported consistently throughout an entire century by believable witnesses, documented in newspapers and shiplogs, and yet they remain unexplained. Whether they were real creatures, mistaken identity, or something else entirely, they captured the imagination of everyone who lived and worked along the river, adding a sense of mystery to what was otherwise a well-known and well-traveled waterway. Chapter 17. The Butler County Gargoyle. Time to talk about one of Ohio's more unusual and frankly bizarre cryptids. The Butler County Gargoyle. This isn't your typical hairy human-like being, or lake monster. This is something that looks like it flew straight out of a medieval church. A gray-winged human-like creature with a head that witnesses described as looking like it was wearing a bicycle helmet. Yeah, you read that right. A bicycle helmet. Sometimes cryptids are just weird, folks. The main sighting of the Butler County Gargoyle happened in the early 1990s. Specifically in the summer of 1992, along a rural road between Hamilton and Fairfield. A couple was driving home late at night, around 11 p.m., when they spotted something unusual on the side of the road ahead. At first, in their headlights, it looked like a person crouched down, maybe someone having car trouble or something wrong. As they got closer and slowed down, they realized this was no person. 3 hours later, a squall hit the area they would have been in if they'd kept their course. Winds over 70 miles per hour, waves reaching 25 feet. Several smaller vessels were damaged, and a fishing boat was lost with its whole crew. The storm hag isn't always seen. More often, it's just the song rising from the water, eerie and compelling. Experienced Great Lakes sailors will tell you, especially the old-timers, that if you hear singing on the water and there's no clear source, you find shelter immediately. You don't question it. You don't debate it. You just get off the water as fast as possible. Ideas about what the storm hag actually is vary widely. Some believe she's genuinely supernatural, a spirit or entity that feeds on drowning victims, or maybe tries to warn sailors out of some twisted sense of mercy. Others think she might be some kind of lake monster that has learned to link certain weather conditions with feeding opportunities. The rough waters bring fish to the surface, and her singing is just some natural sound that happens to occur at the same time as approaching storms. There's also a more ordinary explanation. Lake Erie is known for its unpredictable weather. Experienced sailors can often sense approaching storms through small changes in air pressure, wind patterns, and water conditions. The singing might be a sound caused by wind over water, or even a form of group reaction, where sailors expecting to hear the storm hag before storms interpret natural sounds as her song. But that doesn't explain the visual sightings, the reports of an actual female figure in the water. Skeptics argue these could be floating debris, driftwood that vaguely looks like a human shape, or in some cases, bodies of actual drowning victims that sailors have misidentified in their fear and stress. Neither explanation satisfies believers, who point to how consistent the descriptions are. Over nearly 2 centuries, the storm hag has become part of Great Lakes maritime culture. New sailors are warned about her, not necessarily as literal truth, but as a reminder that Lake Erie is dangerous. that storms can come up suddenly, and that being too confident can kill. Whether you believe in a supernatural entity, or just in respecting the power of the lake, the storm hag serves the same purpose. She keeps sailors alert. Even today, in our age of modern weather forecasting and advanced navigation, there are occasional reports of the storm hag. In 2011, a recreational boater reported hearing singing on the water and seeing a pale figure in the distance. He immediately headed for shore, and within an hour, a sudden squall appeared coming out of nowhere, according to forecasters who'd predicted clear weather. The storm hag remains one of Lake Erie's most lasting and darkest legends. She's a reminder that the Great Lakes, despite looking peaceful and beautiful on calm days, are huge bodies of water that have taken thousands of lives. Whether she's a real entity, a misidentified natural event, or just a myth, her legend has saved lives by making sailors cautious and respectful of the water's power. And on stormy nights on Lake Erie, when the wind howls and the waves crash, some sailors swear they can still hear her singing, calling to those foolish enough to ignore her warning. Chapter 20. The Dayton Phantom Panthers. For our final chapter, we're heading to the suburbs of Dayton for a phenomenon that's both modern and ongoing. The Dayton Phantom Panthers are large black cat-like creatures that have been reported consistently in the Dayton area and throughout western Ohio for decades. We're talking about animals that look like panthers, cougars, or even jaguars roaming through neighborhoods, crossing highways, and leaving signs of their presence. The catch: these animals shouldn't exist in Ohio. There are no native big cats in the state, and yet people keep seeing them. The phenomenon of big black cats, sometimes called alien big cats, or ABCs in cryptozoology circles, isn't unique to Ohio. Similar reports come from all over North America, from areas where large cats aren't supposed to exist. But the Dayton area has had a particularly high number of sightings, enough that local police and wildlife officials have had to address the issue multiple times. The modern wave of Dayton Phantom Panther sightings began in the 1990s, though there are scattered earlier reports going back to the 1960s. Witnesses consistently describe seeing large black or very dark-colored cats, much bigger than any house cat or even a large dog, moving through suburban areas, parks, and the edges of highways. The cats are typically estimated at 50 to 80 pounds, with some witnesses claiming even larger sizes, and move with the distinctive fluid walk of a big cat. One of the most detailed and believable sightings happened in 2004. A Dayton police officer was on patrol in a residential area when his headlights caught something crossing the street ahead. The animal was large, sleek, and black, with a long tail and the unmistakable body shape of a large cat. The officer, who had grown up hunting and was familiar with local wildlife, immediately knew this was not a dog, not a coyote, not any animal that should be in suburban Dayton. He radioed in, describing what he'd seen, and other units responded to search the area. They found tracks in soft ground near where the animal had crossed. Large round paw prints, consistent with a big cat measuring about 4 inches across. The tracks were photographed and later examined by wildlife experts, who confirmed they were cat-like and far too large to be from a bobcat, the only wildcat officially present in Ohio. Throughout the 2000s and into the 2010s, reports kept coming in. Residents reported seeing the cats in their backyards, sometimes stalking smaller animals like rabbits or even family pets. Drivers reported near misses with large black cats crossing highways at night. Trail cameras set up for deer monitoring occasionally captured images of large cat-like shapes, though the quality was often too poor for clear identification. In 2012, a family in Kettering, a Dayton suburb, had a particularly unsettling encounter. Their dog was barking frantically at the back door around dusk. When the father looked out, he saw a large black cat crouched in their backyard, not more than 30 feet from the house. The cat was watching their dog through the glass door. The father grabbed his camera and managed to take several photos before the cat, seeming to realize it was being watched, turned and disappeared into the tree line behind their property. The photos, while not professional quality, clearly show a large black cat-like animal that's far too big to be domestic. So, what are these phantom panthers? The most straightforward explanation is that they're escaped or released exotic pets. Cougars, panthers, and other big cats can be legally owned in some states, though rules vary. Ohio has had mixed rules over the years about exotic animal ownership. It's entirely possible that someone owned a large black cat, maybe a black cougar or leopard, and either it escaped or they let it go when they could no longer care for it. The problem with that theory is how consistent and long-lasting the sightings are. We're talking about reports spanning decades from a relatively small geographic area. If these were individual escaped pets, you'd expect the sightings to cluster around the time of the escape and then stop once the animal was caught, died, or moved on. Instead, sightings continue year after year, suggesting either multiple escapes, which seems unlikely, or maybe a breeding population. But a breeding population of big cats in southwestern Ohio, that's a hard sell for wildlife biologists. Big cats need large territories, plenty of prey, and generally avoid human contact. Suburban Dayton doesn't provide the kind of habitat that would support even a single big cat long-term, let alone multiple generations. Some researchers have suggested that what people are seeing might be very large black bobcats. Bobcats do live in Ohio, and while black coloring is very rare in bobcats, it's not impossible. From a distance or in poor lighting, a large bobcat might be mistaken for a panther or cougar. But this explanation doesn't account for the size estimates. Even a very large bobcat maxes out around 40 pounds and 3 feet long, significantly smaller than the animals witnesses are describing. There's also the idea that these might be cougars, eastern cougars that were thought to be extinct, but might have small surviving groups. Cougars can have very dark coloring, and while truly black cougars are extremely rare, they're not impossible. But again, this requires us to believe that a population of one of North America's largest predators has been living in Ohio in fairly populated areas without clear proof. What's interesting is that phantom panther sightings often come in waves. There will be a bunch of reports over a few weeks or months, then nothing for a while, then another bunch. This pattern suggests the animals, whatever they are, might be passing through the area rather than living there permanently. Big cats can have enormous territories and travel significant distances. It's possible these animals are moving through southwestern Ohio as part of larger wandering patterns. The Ohio Department of Natural Resources officially states that there are no confirmed populations of big cats other than bobcats in the state. They acknowledge reports, but say they're due to mistaken identity, escaped pets, or hoaxes. They point out that despite thousands of trail cameras placed across Ohio for wildlife management, none have captured clear, definite images of large black cats. But the witnesses keep coming forward. People who have no reason to lie, who are familiar with local wildlife, who are certain about what they've seen. Police officers, wildlife professionals, farmers, suburbanites, all describing the same thing. Large black cat-like animals that shouldn't be there, but apparently are. The Dayton phantom panthers represent a perfect example of a modern cryptid mystery. In an age of widespread cameras and advanced monitoring technology, how can large animals consistently avoid clear documentation? Are these creatures remarkably good at hiding? Are witnesses misidentifying known animals? Or is there a population of big cats living on the edges of human settlements smart enough and careful enough to avoid being clearly proven? Whatever the truth, the sightings continue. The Dayton area and southwestern Ohio remain a hotspot for reports of big black cats, and whether they're escaped pets, misidentified bobcats, remaining cougars, or something else entirely, they've earned their place in Ohio's modern cryptid collection. A reminder that even in our well-mapped, well-watched world, mystery still exists, sometimes right in our own backyards. And there you have it, folks. 20 of Ohio's weirdest, most fascinating cryptids. From frog people to lake monsters. From creatures swinging 2x4s, to things that come out of ancient bogs wrapped in strange green mist. Ohio might not have the fame of the Pacific Northwest when it comes to cryptid sightings. But I'd argue it has something even better. It has variety. It has creatures that are so bizarre, so tied to their locations, that they feel uniquely American in their strangeness. Whether you believe these creatures are real, whether you think they're mistaken identity, hoaxes, or something we don't yet understand, the stories themselves are valuable. They're part of Ohio's folklore, part of the state's identity. They remind us that mystery still exists in the modern world, that not everything has been explained, sorted, and filed away. So, next time you're driving through Ohio, maybe take a detour. Drive past the Little Miami River at night. Visit Salt Fork State Park. Stand on the shores of Lake Erie and look out at the water. Walk the boardwalks through Cedar Bog. Who knows? You might just see something that makes you question everything you thought you knew about what's possible. Thanks for joining me on this cryptid journey through the Buckeye State. If you enjoyed this deep dive into Ohio's strangest creatures, make sure to like, subscribe, and let me know in the comments which state we should explore next. Until then, keep your eyes open and your cameras ready. You never know what might be watching you from the trees.